Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the Rustic Diamond Hat, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. To make this hat, you'll need one skein of Peyton's Alpaca Blend and a USK 6.5 millimeter hook, or whatever gets you gauge. This pattern comes in two sizes, teen to small adult, which will fit your average head, and then adult large for larger heads. We start at the top with the crown, and then we make these great diamond shapes right here. Adding a pom-pom is totally optional. Whatever you like to finish off your hat with is totally fine. And as I say, we work from the top all the way down to the brim, and as we work, we create these great relief diamonds that overlap right here. Now, as you can see, this is a closer fitting beanie size that I've made right here, but I have included the stitch repeat, so you can make this hat just as long and slouchy as you like. This pattern begins with a magic circle, and then we make some standard half double crochet increases for several rounds to create the crown. So to begin, let's start with that magic circle. I'm going to take the end of my yarn and I'm going to wrap it over my finger twice towards me. Then I'm going to insert my hook under both of those loops right on my finger, grab the back one, pull it just barely in front of the other one. You can see how they're crossed right there on my finger still. Then I will yarn over and pull that loop through. Then, to begin my row, I'm going to chain one and then half double crochet 10 times right into that ring. So I'll yarn over, and I want to make sure to go under both of those loops, both the one that goes all the way around my finger and the one that has the tail there. Then I can yarn over, pull that loop up and through, and then yarn over and pull through all 3 loops to finish my half double crochet. There we are. It's a little easier after I pull my finger out of that ring, which with that stitch on there, it's now stabilized and we can do that. So we'll continue with 9 more half double crochets right into that ring. You can see when I go right into that ring, I want to make sure to catch that tail as well, because that's what will let us cinch up that hole when we're all done and ready to close up the top of our hat. So just continue working half double crochets right on into that ring, again, making sure you catch that tail until you have 10 total. Okay, now here I've got my 10 half double crochets made in the ring, and I've put stitch markers in the first and last stitch of this round. I like to do this for every round when I'm working in the round because it really helps me keep track of my stitches and I don't accidentally end up working into the slip stitch. And that slip stitch is what we're going to make now. So I go into that first stitch there that we made and just make a slip stitch to close up that first round and finish it off. Now, as you can see, we've got this big hole here in the center, and that's why we've been crocheting over that tail in a magic circle. Now I can just give that a tug, and I do have to pull on it a little tighter. This yarn's got a little bit of texture on it, and when I do that, I like to put my fingers right over that hole, and that seems to help stabilize it, and I can feel too as it's getting closed. So just sort of keep pulling really gently. We don't want to break the yarn until we've got a nice close there. Then, when I weave in my ends, I'll make sure to weave this end in both directions to help lock it in so that that magic circle doesn't open back up on me. So now I need to sort of straighten out my hook and everything here and get ourselves ready to continue crocheting. So I'll get my hook back on that loop, and with that, we're ready for round 2. Round 2 is quite simple. We start with a chain 1, and then we half double crochet twice in every stitch around. So at the end of round 2, we started with 10 stitches in round 1. Round 2 will have 20. So I just go right back into that first stitch for my first half double crochet. And as soon as I've got that first stitch made, I always like to go ahead and move that stitch marker right on up to the first stitch of our new row here. And then as I say, we go right back into that same stitch for a second half double crochet. And that's what we'll do in each stitch around. Work 2 half double crochets so that we have a total of 20 half double crochets at the end of round 2. So here we are at the end of round 2, and I've got a total of 20 half double crochets made. So with that, we can simply finish by joining with a slip stitch, and we're ready for round 3. Now round 3, again, continues some pretty standard increases. We're going to chain 1 and then work 2 half double crochets in the first stitch and 1 half double crochet in the stitch after that. And that's our repeat. 2, then 1, 2, then 1, 2, then 1, all the way around until we have a total of 30 stitches. After that, rows 4 and 5 and 6 are all following that same basic plan, where we have our increases distributed around with another stitch in between each of those increases. So that at the end of round 4, we'll have 40 stitches, and at the end of round 5, we'll have 50 stitches. At the end of round 6, again, continuing those standard increases, we'll have a total of 60 stitches. And at the end of round 6 is where we want to start, or rather where we want to stop for our smallest size. To make the larger size, we just continue one more round of increases through round 7. Then we're ready to begin the sides. So let's go back here for just a minute and make round 3 together, and then you can follow the instructions after that for your size, and we'll come back to work the sides of our hat. So again, for round 3, we've got our chain 1. We're going to put 2 half double crochets into the first stitch. So there's 1 and 2. There we are. And then a half double crochet in the stitch after that. Then we move on to the next one with 2 more, 1 and 2, and 1 crochet in the stitch after that. So like I say, pretty standard circle increases. Just keep following along with the pattern until you have the number of increases and stitches for the size you want to make, and then we'll be ready to work the sides of our hat. So as you can see here, I've worked the first 3 rounds, and if we come back to the finished hat, you can see we're really just working in even rounds, making a nice flat circle until we have the size of the crown needed. So you'll end with either 60 or 70 stitches, depending on the size you're making. Then we can go to the sides where we work evenly. With however many same number of stitches you had in that last round is the same number of stitches then that will carry us all the way down to the brim. But it's time to start making this really beautiful pattern that we'll make using cluster stitches. So if you're following along with the written instructions, when we get to the sides, you'll start again with round 1, just so that it makes it a little easier for everyone to follow along. So for round 1 of our sides, we start again with a chain 1. Then we are going to work half double crochet stitches in the next 2 stitches. And that's of course starting with that very first stitch right there. So I'll go right in there and make a first half double crochet. And since it's the first stitch of a round, I want to go ahead and make sure to move that stitch marker on up. And then I will put my half double crochet right in that next stitch. And then we're going to make our first cluster stitch. And cluster is one of those terms in crochet that can mean a lot of different things. So you need to follow the written instructions for any pattern where you see a cluster and go back and look at those special stitches, the special stitch section, to see what kind of cluster you're going to be making. For this pattern, it's like a front post double crochet 2 together, but we're working both of those posts around the same stitch. So what we're going to do is yarn over and then find that very next stitch, and instead of working under those top 2 loops, we're going to work around the post of it. So we come from the front of our fabric, we go around that stitch or that post with our hook and come back out on the front of our fabric. Then we yarn over, pull that loop up and behind that post, and yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops. So there's 1 and 2. Now we stop with 2 loops left on our hook, yarn over again, and go right around that same stitch. Again, front to back, come up on the other side, and we can yarn over and pull that through. And you can see that loop I just yarned over is just going right underneath the one that I did just a moment ago. So we pull that loop up and through, then we yarn over and pull through those first 2 loops, and then with 3 loops left on our hook, we yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. And that finishes our first cluster. After that, our repeat around is all the same until we get right to those last 2 stitches. So our repeat is half double crochet in the next 4 stitches and then cluster again. So now that we've worked a cluster around that stitch, we don't want to go back and work into the top of it. That stitch is considered worked. So we move on to the next stitch and put our next half double crochet right under those top 2 loops, just as we normally would. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4, like so. So you can see I've got my cluster and then 4 half double crochets. So now it's time for another cluster. So we yarn over and go around the post of the next stitch. And if you're ever having trouble figuring out what post to go around, you just go ahead and find those top 2 loops, which you might be more used to working into, and then find the post that it's attached to. So we yarn over, go around that post from front to back, yarn over, pull up our loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over again, go back around that post the same way, yarn over, pull that loop up and through, yarn over and pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through all 3. And then we just repeat that all the way around. The only difference is when we get to the end, we'll have a cluster and then finish with half double crochet in the last 2 stitches. You can see that's right next to those 2 stitches, so we'll still have 4 stitches in between our little cluster stitches. So I'll see you when we get to the end of round 1 of our sides. So there we are after round 1 of our sides. Of course, on your full-sized hat, this will be quite a bit bigger. But you can see I've got my cluster stitches made with 4 half double crochets in between each one of those. So with that, we're ready for round 2. And for round 2, we start again with a chain 1, and this time we're going to half double crochet in the first 6 stitches, and that includes that cluster stitch. We're going to ignore that one for now and come almost all the way over to this one. So let's go ahead and get those first 6 in here together. I'll get my stitch marker out of the way there so I can make my first one and move it on up to that stitch right there. There we go. So that's 1, and then we've got 2, 3. You can see that one went right into the top of our cluster, and that's fine. 4, 5, and 6. And that lands us at the stitch right before that next cluster. So what we're going to do now is work a cluster, half double crochet, and then another cluster in the stitch after that. So we want to sandwich this one in between 2 others on this round. So we yarn over and work that first cluster just as before, but this time we're going into that or around that half double crochet stitch before the cluster. So just as before, basically a front post double crochet, 2 together, but all worked around the same stitch, like so. Then we half double crochet right in that cluster, and then cluster around the next stitch, like so, just as we did before. There we go. Then we half double crochet in the next stitch. And you have to kind of look. Sometimes those half double crochets right after a cluster want to hide a little bit. So if you need to, you can sort of pull your fabric apart a little bit. But that right there is our basic repeat. Half double crochet in 6 stitches, then cluster, half double crochet, cluster, half double crochet. So with that, we start over again with 6 more half double crochets. So for this one, if you start getting confused, you will have 7 half double crochets in between each set of cluster, half double crochet, cluster. But because we start with those 6 and we end with 1, then we start again with 6. So even though it'll be 7 in between those clusters, you can see here, that's the end of our repeat. Then we start our repeat again. Just want to kind of go over that so that people don't get confused. So that means at the end of round 2, you'll finish up with 1 half double crochet in that last stitch there right before you join. So just continue on around. Like I say, we've got our 1, 2, 3. So we'll need that one right there on the top of our cluster. And then we continue on around until we get to that first stitch before our next cluster. So we've got one more right there. So you can see that's the stitch before our next cluster. So we can go back and double check our work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's right. So then we're ready to work a cluster around that next stitch, just like we were doing before. And then half double crochet in the top of that one. And then another cluster on the other side. And then we'll have another 7 half double crochets until we do that again. So that when we come all the way around, like I say, we'll end with 1 half double crochet in the last stitch, and then we'll be ready to join. So here we are at the end of round 2, and as you can see, I had a cluster, half double crochet, cluster, and half double crochet in that very last stitch to finish off our round. So with that, we're ready to slip stitch join to our first single crochet and begin round 3. So to begin round 3, we'll start with a chain 1, and then we're going to half double crochet in the first 5 stitches. So we go right into that first one and move our stitch marker up, of course. There we are. And then 2, 3, 4, and 5. And as you can see, that brings us back to a stitch right before one of our clusters. So we're just continuing to build out that diamond shape. So we cluster around that next stitch there. There we go. Just work off those loops one at a time if you need to. I'm going to pull up some more yarn from my skein here. There we go. And then we half double crochet in the next stitch, which is the top of that next cluster. Then we cluster again right in between there. You can see that half double crochet in between those two. This time we want to go around that one with our usual cluster for this pattern. And then we half double crochet in the top of the next stitch. And then one more cluster here on the other side. So you can kind of see it's almost like bowling pins in a way, where we've got the 1, then the 2, and then the 3. And they're all sort of offset like that. So after we've worked that one off, like so, then it's time to start our repeat around again. Half double crochet in the next 5. So there's 1, 2, 3. Oh, my yarn's creeping up on me here. 4 and 5. And then that brings us right back to that next cluster section. We're in the stitch right before it. So we do a cluster right around that next one there. Like so. Then half double crochet in the top of the next one. Cluster around that one right in between there. Finish that one off like so. Half double crochet in the top of the next one. And then, of course, we need one more to finish off this set of 3 clusters. Just make sure you're always working those half double crochets in between. We only work clusters into stitches, into half double crochet stitches. For this pattern, we don't work a cluster into another cluster. So that will also help you keep you lined up. So after that, we just continue on with our repeats. And of course, you'll have a few more on your big hat, 5 half double crochets, and then work those 3 clusters over the previous 2. Making sure to work half double crochets into the clusters themselves, and we'll be all done with round 3. So here we are at the end of round 3, and as you can see, one of those cluster stitches was the last stitch of our round. So not a big deal, we still just join with a slip stitch as we normally would. And with that, we're ready for round 4. Now rounds 4 and 5 are rounds we've already made. It's the same as rounds 2 and 1 of those sides. So if we come back and look at what we've done here, round 1 of our side is where we just had those clusters with the 4 half double crochet separating them. So our next round is a repeat of round 2, where we had the 2 on either side. And as you can see, as we work around with our pattern, those 2 would match up with that row there, so that we're creating that diamond shape. So for the next round, we've just got clusters in between. And then in the round after that, we're repeating round 1, where we just finish it off with that cluster right there in between those. But at that point, then, we've only got 4 half double crochets in between, so we're putting another one of those in there. Remember how we had that one sort of in between that got left behind? When we work that on row 5, that will be the start of our next set of diamonds. Our next set of diamonds. That was hard to say. But let's come back here to the finished hat. You can see we're really just working half double crochets and clusters. We're just moving those around a little bit so that we've got one diamond right here. And then you can see where we had that one cluster by itself and then 4 half double crochets and then another cluster and then 4 half double crochets and another cluster. It was finishing off those, but it was also the first one of these. So really it's just a matter of following along with the written pattern to see where those half double crochets land and where those clusters land, or you can look at a picture of the hat and really see where those need to be. So we just continue working those rows, and basically it's an 8-row repeat that gets us all the way from there up to there. So we've got our 2 set of diamonds. So for just the beanie style, I found that repeating that just through round 1 again to finish off this bottom set of diamonds was all the further I needed. But if you like a longer, slouchier hat, you can absolutely keep adding rounds in this stitch pattern to get as long of a stitch pattern for your hat as you need before we come to the brim. So when you've got the length of the hat you want, then it's time to go ahead and add the brim. So before we make the actual ribbing of our brim, we need a setup round, which is simply chain 1 and single crochet in each stitch around, and then join when you get to the end. So after you've finished your single crochet setup round, then it's time for the ribbed brim. And this is a style of brim that I like to use for most of my top-down hats, as well as some sleeve cuffs and all kinds of fun things. So there is a separate tutorial for this on my YouTube page if you'd like a little bit longer tutorial for it. However, in all basicness, it is chain 7 or however many you want for the width of your brim. So there's 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then for this first row, I'm going to skip the chain closest to my hook and single crochet in the back loop, or the underneath loop rather, I should say, of each chain until I get back there to the hat. So that would be 6 single crochets total. So there's 2, and then 3, and you are working into the chain, so go ahead and take your time with it here. 4, you can see my hat's trying to swing all over the place here. 5, and find that last one there. Sometimes when the hat twists around, it wants to twist your chain. So when you straighten the hat back out, it should straighten your chain back out. So there's 6. Alrighty. Now what we need to do is find the next stitch of the hat. You can see this is the one we joined to and where we started chaining out of when we began our brim. So we want to come to the next stitch and insert our hook and pull up a loop. And then the next stitch and insert our hook and pull up a loop. And then I'm simply going to pull that loop on through for a big slip stitch 2 together, just like so. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that slip stitch is nice and tight. We're not going to be working back into it at all, so I don't have to worry about that. And I want my ribbed brim to be nicely tight to my hat. Now with that, we'll turn and to work back the other direction. And I'm going to skip that slip stitch I just made, and then I'm going to back loop only single crochet in those 6 single crochets. So again, we want to skip the slip stitch that we made right there, and then back loop only, which is that top loop of the V that's furthest away from you. We go right in there for a single crochet. So again, we had 6 stitches in our brims, so we'll have 6 stitches here. Just continue working under that back loop only until you've made all of those stitches. And if you like a little bit of a longer brim or a shorter brim, you can absolutely add or subtract stitches here. There is no stitch multiple. It's however many stitches you want for the length of your brim. So with that, I have now single crocheted through the back loop of each of those 6 stitches. So this end, and only at this end, the far end away from the hat, do we chain 1 and then turn and work back the other way, or turn and chain 1, whichever you prefer. But we don't chain 1 when we're starting from this end, only when we're starting from this end of the brim. Now with that, we can back loop only, single crochet back towards the hat. So it's always in the back loop only except for that very first row. So there's 2, and you can use a stitch marker here if it helps you in the end. 3, or even in this 6th one, because as you're working back towards the hat, sometimes that 6th stitch, the last single crochet before the slip stitch, likes to hide a little bit, especially when you're working back this direction. So you might need to turn it over a little bit, find those top 2 loops, and then find that back one that you want to go under with your hook. You have to kind of dig for it a little bit, but it's in there. There we go. So we always want to make sure we've got our stitches there and we don't accidentally skip that one. So if you do find that one difficult to find, like it was right there, putting that stitch marker right in that one can help you as you come back and forth. So now that we've worked our way back down to our hat, we can see right there was that last stitch that we slip stitched to. So we want to come over to the next one. Go in there, pull up a loop, and then to the next stitch and pull up a loop. Pull that loop on through, like so, and then we're ready to turn, skip that slip stitch, and start again with another single crochet in that back loop. So since this is the actual single crochet that likes to hide, we want to make sure to move that stitch marker on up. That's the one that always wants to hide a little bit because we're not chaining 1 there because that would create some looseness right where that brim attaches to our hat. We want that edge to be nice and tight. However, the great thing is, even though those stitches are tight, our brim is still going to be delightfully stretchy. So hopefully you've got the idea. We just keep working back and forth in rows until we get all the way around our hat. And then you can break your yarn and sew, after you've gotten all the way around, sew that the bottom of that first stitch to the end there of your the last row, so to speak. So when we get all the way around, you'll use that final tail. Make sure you cut it long enough so you can do some sewing, and then you can simply whip stitch through the back loop of the last row that you make going this way, and then the bottom of that foundation chain, and that will help mimic the look of our ribbing here. So if I pull up our finished hat again, you can see we've just worked back loop only, back and forth in rows, all the way around. And then when we get to the end, we just use our tail to sew that final round to the bottom of our first round, and you'll have finished your hat. After that, you can add pom-poms or whatever detailing you like to finish off your rustic diamond hat. And that's how to crochet the rustic diamond hat using Peyton's Alpaca Blend and a USK 6.5mm hook. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you'll give this yarn a try. I really like the finish it gives this hat. It's nicely fuzzy, and it has a really great warm look to it. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to grab the free pattern on mooglyblog.com, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day, everybody.